Good evening. It's been 3.5 years since the tragedy of Grenfell revealed the true and shocking extent of how many other buildings in the capital were unsafe. Since then, thousands have been living in the knowledge that their homes could go up in flames. Many have had to foot the cost of repairs and 24-hour waking watches. Today, the Housing Secretary offered some relief, £3.5 billion to remove cladding from the most unsafe buildings, but only those over 18 metres. Leaseholders in buildings under 18 metres have been offered government loans instead, and there is no money for any other building fire safety issues or fire wardens. Our political correspondent Simon Harris reports.
For many Londoners, it's the ultimate dream home, a riverside apartment overlooking the Thames. But for almost 1,000 people living at Royal Artillery Quays in Woolwich, the dream turns sour. The light-coloured cement render on the outside hides a cladding called expanded polystyrene, and that, say the leaseholders, makes the flats worthless.
I bought this lovely, flat that I have in 2014, thinking I'll retire in beautiful surroundings, peaceful. And now it's a nightmare.
In 2019, when I put it on the market, the surveyor from the lender's side came in and told me that my flat was worth nothing now, and I'm unable to sell it, and I'm facing crippling bills and potential bankruptcy.
The Residents' Association reckons it'll cost around £16 million to strip the cladding from the 8 blocks. Leaseholders already have to pay £500 a year for fire wardens to patrol the estate, known as a waking watch. Cladding wasn't the only problem exposed by the post-Grenfell focus on fire safety and building regulations. Many blocks, it turns out, have serious flaws with so-called fire breaks, the gap between internal walls. In Parliament, the government announced a further £3.5 billion would be made available to try to end the cladding crisis.
Today, I'm announcing an unprecedented intervention, a clear plan to remove unsafe cladding, to provide certainty to leaseholders, to make the industry pay for its faults of the past.
In practice, that means the government will fund the removal of unsafe cladding from high-rise buildings above 18 metres tall and offer low-interest loans for cladding to be stripped off smaller buildings. What the government won't fund are waking watches and internal fire safety work like fire breaks. For the residents of Royal Artillery Quays, the announcement didn't go far enough.
Robert Jenrick said nothing about the internal works that need to be done, and that is likely to fall on the leaseholders, and also all the costs of all the temporary measures. And while the cladding is remediated, we're still paying for that.
Barratt, which built the flats in 2003, said they complied with building regulations at the time, but a spokesman said, "We were sorry to hear of the difficulties facing leaseholders, and we had a constructive meeting with them and fire engineers last week as we work hard to find a solution for them to this complex set of issues." In high-rise homes across London, today's government announcement will be a relief for some leaseholders, but many others are still blighted by the fallout from Grenfell. Simon Harris, ITV News, Woolwich.
Well, the unsafe cladding affecting thousands of Londoners' homes was discovered the day after the Grenfell fire. Other building safety issues have been exposed by the Grenfell inquiry. It continued today with more evidence from the company that made the cladding on the tower. Rags Martell's report starts on pictures of a building on fire years before Grenfell.
A cladding fire years before Grenfell. This one from 2012, one of several that took place in the UAE. The dangers of flammable panels on high-rise buildings was discussed by Arconic, the company that went on to sell the cladding at Grenfell.
Arconic. Innovation. Engineered.
Deborah French was a sales manager who noticed the fires in Dubai. She emailed her customers in 2013 to reassure them about Arconic products.
Why did you make those statements?
Reading back on it now, it was not the right thing to put in there. In terms of the wording, it was too heavy on the sales side.
Heavy on the sales side? What do you mean?
As in, it was a document that was sent to give them some reassurances that the business was comfortable with offering the materials that we were offering, and that it was all still okay for us to use and supply.
Arconic would go on to sell more flammable cladding, this time to Grenfell. The panels spread the flames that killed 72 people. But other documents revealed at the inquiry show Arconic knew the dangers of their products. In 2011, 6 years before Grenfell, it described the cladding cassettes as having a bad behaviour exposed to fire, but added it could still work in countries with national regulations who are not as restrictive, like the UK. It also emerged that Arconic made more money from selling flammable cladding than the safer fire retardant version. Profits, it seems, always comes before people.
Well, Rags, the huge problems with building safety were revealed after Grenfell, but how far does today's announcement go to solving the crisis?
Lucrezia, it's called a cladding crisis, but it's actually a building safety crisis. Cladding was one of the problems that spread the fire at Grenfell, but it had many other safety problems like flammable insulation. There were no fire stops, and the Grenfell inquiry is slowly uncovering all this, and it's symptomatic of a weak building regulations, and that's ultimately the government's fault. So two things from today's announcement: the 1.6 billion that they've always said was going to solve the problem for the last year clearly wasn't enough, and they've constantly underestimated the problem. And the extra money announced today will reassure some people, but it's simply not enough. There are some estimates which put the cladding crisis at 15 to 30 billion pounds. So once again, it's too little, too late. And every day it continues, people's lives are at risk. They're at risk from their homes going up in flames, and also their lives are on hold. They're bankruptcies, there's mental health problems, so it's a huge problem. This cladding crisis is not over.
All right, Rags, thank you.